Good morning. It is Monday, the 24th of November. I'm Maeve McMahon, and this is Europe Today, Euronews' daily live fix of European news and analysis. Thank you so much for joining us for our very first edition. Coming up today, it is a historic week for Ukraine and Europe, with the future of the continent's security at stake. The Swiss city of Geneva took centre stage yesterday for high-stake talks about the controversial 28-point US-Russia plan for Ukraine. EU ambassadors also huddled in Brussels last night to work on a counterproposal to give Kyiv more space to negotiate a better deal. But the clock is still ticking towards a deadline set by President Trump for this Thursday Thanksgiving. To get up to speed, let's bring in now Euronews' EU editor, Maria Tadeo. Maria, good morning.
Good morning.
Look, we're hearing there was progress in Geneva and that deadline could be flexible, but what's your take on the Geneva talks?
Well, absolutely. And Maeve, this was certainly the most intense diplomatic effort since the war started. Of course, we had seen in the days prior the U.S. administration really ramping up the pressure on Ukraine, repeating this deadline on Thursday, Thanksgiving Day. And of course, President Trump also tweeting the Ukrainians, they are simply not grateful. But on Sunday in Geneva, we did see Marco Rubio, the top U.S. diplomat, take down some of that temperature, saying there is work that is going through and work is being done. Let's take a look.
Well, indeed, the Americans have certainly left, and they said that there was, progress was made indeed. But meanwhile, today, the Europeans are meeting the Africans in Angola, and we've seen that the EU Council President Costa has asked them to huddle together to discuss Ukraine. But what exactly can the Europeans do?
Well, Maeve, yesterday on the Sunday, European ambassadors already met here in Brussels. They will huddle, as you say, on the sidelines of this meeting on the Monday. There has been a lot of leaks over the weekend about documents in terms of this counter-proposal. Euronews has seen them. We have to stress 2 points. One is the European leadership is not officially endorsing any of these documents, but the direction they want to take, and sources are very clear to Euronews on this, is that they want to seize and ease some of the pressure on the territorial concessions. The idea that the frozen assets would be released and given to Russia, that is an absolute no-go. They also want to stress that there would be no veto to Ukraine when it comes to NATO. If Ukraine does not join NATO, it's not because of Russia. It would be because there is simply no consensus around NATO allies. They also want to stress the idea of a ceasefire too. So that is the direction they want to take. And then to Maeve, for the Europeans now, this is about also the optics. They do not want to be seen as wanting to sink this plan because they fear they could get the worst end of the stick from President Trump. The goal now is to sway this proposal to also buy more time for Kyiv to get a better deal. And I should also stress, none of the diplomats that I spoke to over the weekend believe this can be done by Thursday, just simply because of the complexity of this proposal. But again, this diplomatic push from the Europeans continue in that direction.
Indeed, and for now, the Americans, of course, have left Geneva. Thank you so much. Maria Tadeo, Euronews' EU editor, keeping across that story for us. And for more, of course, on this developing story, do visit euronews.com for longer reads and analysis. But coming up, we'll be joined here in the studio by Michał Baranowski, the Polish trade minister, who's in Brussels today, for what are set to be very, very frank talks between the Americans and the Europeans about the fraught EU-US trade deal. The EU signed up to an unbalanced deal on tariffs to stabilise relations with the US and assure support for Ukraine, but it is not sure that that bet will pay off. Minister Baranowski, welcome to Europe Today.
Great to be with you.
Thank you so much for joining us on what is a very intense, busy day for you. But first, a critical week as well for the Ukrainians and the Europeans. But the Europeans are not getting a seat at the table here.
Well, we are getting there. It's a little bit confusing, the situation around the peace plan. It turns out that this is an opening bid rather than a final proposal. We are now back at the new stage of the negotiations. The initial proposal, I think it was clear, was not balanced. So
that's been put in the dustbin, has it? The 28 plan that was clearly had the fingerprints of the Kremlin all over, is that ditched? Is it in the bin?
I would not say it as that far. Look, and it's in the end for Ukrainian government to decide what they can accept or not. But it's not only Ukraine's security, it's very much Europe's security. Therefore, we are at the table. We are the biggest backer, both financial and militarily, of Ukraine. And that makes perfect sense for us to be very much part of the plan.
And that's why the Europeans are meeting today in Angola. I mean, on the sidelines of the EU-Africa meeting. Will they be able to sway this?
I'm very hopeful and optimistic. I really cannot imagine, frankly, let's imagine the opposite scenario in which Europeans are not part of the solution. How would it work? Who would pay for it? Who would provide security guarantees with United States? In the end, we all want, and I'm convinced that President Trump as well, wants a stable peace, not only something that will be taken advantage of by the Russian government that has a long history of walking away from any agreements that they signed the day before.
And as I said, the Americans have left Geneva, but their counterparts have arrived here in Brussels, and that's why you're here for high-stakes trade talks. I mean, the EU agreed to the 15% tariffs on the basis that the deal would provide stability and keep the US engaged. But given what we know now, Minister, should we reject this deal that was signed off back in July?
No, we should not. I mean, this is a deal that provided stability. We are meeting today with Secretary Lutnick and USTR Greer to talk about where we are. It provided stability, and also in comparison to other US deals, this is actually pretty decent deal that Europe got. Would I be happier if it was more balanced, if we got a bigger slice of the pie? Absolutely. But I think we'll be looking at both what has been signed and the bigger strategic picture, because also what has happened is we have seen, for example, China putting a dependency on rare metals right on the table as a big gun, both against the US and against Europe.
And today's all about the nitty-gritty. I mean, what kind of exemptions will we be trying to get today?
It's not only about the nitty-gritty. The nitty-gritty is, to a large extent, done by the Commission that put forward an action plan. I could go into the details, but I think those might be a little bit too detailed. I think today we are aiming to get a big picture with Lutnick and Greer that we are moving in the right direction, both on our part, but also on their part. There is, for example, steel tariffs that are still to be fully taken care of. But I suspect that we'll be talking not only about the bilateral aspect, but also about overproduction coming from third countries, so to say.
And tech, of course, is coming into these trade talks as well. I mean, is the US trying to push you to change your digital rules and legislation?
I would be surprised if digital rules were not voiced by the Americans. It would be out of character. Europe is very clear that we are providing a stable base for everyone to engage also in services, in digital services, but we are not going to walk away from our sovereign regulations. So we can talk about the impact on our businesses, on American businesses, but that's one of the red lines that I don't think we'll all of a sudden say, okay, forget about the digital regulations. We'll just do what you tell us.
It's a red line. And just to go back to Ukraine and the reconstruction, who should pay when it comes to these frozen Russian assets, that was the main tool the Europeans had on the table, but it seems to be scuppered now.
I don't think it's done. Look, it is, as you say, one of the key questions. Russia, it's clear who has to pay at the end. It is Russia. Russia is the aggressor. We happen as Europe to have the frozen assets that can be used through a loan to finance Ukraine over the next 2 years to the tune of 140 billion. And I don't think this is gone. We do need to make sure that that tool is preserved in our pocket.
OK, we'll keep an eye on that. Thank you so much, Minister, for being with us, and best of luck for your busy day. Now, as I said, another major point on the minds of Europeans is, of course, the plan to use Russian frozen assets to fund the reconstruction of Ukraine. But President Trump's plans throws the reparations loan for the country into disarray, as Jakub Janis reports.
You don't have the cards. That is what Donald Trump told President Zelensky earlier this year. But Brussels thought it held an ace: the frozen Russian assets. Now, the 28-point US peace plan has called out Europe's hand. And the pot is massive. Estimated 300 billion euros in Russian central bank assets are frozen across the G7 countries. The vast majority, 185 billion euros, is locked right here in Belgium by Euroclear, a securities depository. Brussels planned to use the Russian frozen assets to issue an unprecedented reparations loan for Ukraine. But the US plan flips the script with a controversial proposal: unblock the funds and split them into two investment vehicles. Fund number one for Ukraine's reconstruction, $100 billion of the frozen assets would be deployed and Europe would have to front another $100 billion of its own cash. The catch? The US takes 50% of the profits. Fund number 2, a US-Russian joint venture. The rest of the money will be invested in projects for Moscow. Far from paying reparations for attacking its neighbor, the Kremlin is rewarded with a commercial opportunity. The result? Moscow gets a win, Washington flips a profit, and Europe loses its main leverage. Brussels is not at the table, and it may end up reduced to a spectator with a very expensive bill to pay.
And for more on this, we can bring in now Thomas Hendrik Ives, the former president of Estonia, who's joining us this morning from Bucharest. Great to have you with us. Thank you for talking to Europe Today.
Great to be here.
Look, let's talk about money in just a minute, sir. But first, your thoughts on the Trump plan. Do you think it's a big win for the Kremlin?
It's a fantastic win for the Kremlin, at least as it was originally proposed. And it's probably not the Trump plan, it's the Trump-Putin plan. It's clear that everything is in that original document is in favor of Moscow and in every way against what Ukraine needs. And they're the victim.
And could it weaken Ukraine, you think, and perhaps benefit American and Russian investors?
Well, it's clear from there that it's seen as a business deal, and the collateral damage is to Ukraine, and a little bit more, an additional collateral damage to Europe, which ends up footing the bill.
So what should the Europeans be doing here? I mean, they've come up with a counterproposal last night. Ambassadors were meeting. EU leaders will meet today in Angola. What should they be doing here?
Well, it's clear this plan cannot fly without the Europeans. The Europeans are supposed to be paying for it ultimately. And moreover, the plan is originally foreseen without even consulting Europeans, says, okay, planes will be based in Poland without ever asking Poland. Where does this come from? So this will not fly. Ultimately, if the Europeans scupper this deal, then nothing will happen.
Then nothing will happen. And what about the frozen Russian assets? The Europeans were banking on using this to reconstruct Ukraine, but now it seems to be a little bit in disarray. Who should pay here? The Europeans or the Russians?
Well, it's an ongoing discussion. It is not. We have not gotten to the end of it, and the Europeans are not paying. This money these are frozen Russian assets, and the dispute is how do we get those funds, and that's where the discussions are going on with the Belgians. But otherwise, this money is Russia's. And it will be spent on reparations and on repairing Ukraine once this war is over.
Okay, Thomas Hendrik Ives, thank you so much for joining us and being our guest this morning on Europe Today. And thank you so much for watching, because that does indeed bring this edition to an end. For more news and headlines, do take a look at Euronews.com or download the Euronews app to stay afloat of all the developing stories. I'll be back tomorrow, bright and early Tuesday, live here on Euronews. See you then.